Good afternoon. My name is Becky Robinson, and I'm here today with Dan Negroni, and I'm so excited to be with you. Dan, actually, it's the morning in California, and I bet we have a lot of watchers and viewers in California, so good morning to all of you. How are you, Dan?
I'm doing great. How are you, Becky?
Well, I'm doing great too, except my headset isn't plugged in, so I'm going to take it off. That was kind of crazy. All right, so Dan and I actually had the pleasure to meet a few weeks back in San Diego, actually in San Francisco, and we've been preparing for this big day. And while we're getting ready to start our discussion, what I'd like to do is a few housekeeping things for everyone on the call. So the first one is that we intend this to be an interactive discussion. Dan has a lot of knowledge and expertise that we want to be able to glean today, and so we're going to invite you throughout the presentation to put your questions in the question panel. So what I want to do right now is invite you to try it out. And I'd love to hear where you're calling in from. If I was spot on when I said good afternoon and you're somewhere on the East Coast, then let us know where you're calling in from. Or if you're on the West Coast and I was better off saying good morning, let me know that as well. And we're going to see how I did. There's a couple of other things I want to let you know about. The first one is that you're going to want to stay on until the very end of this broadcast, because not only do I have books to give away if you hear the question I'm going to ask at the end of the broadcast, but I also have a 30-minute consultation with Dan on these topics of millennials in the workforce. So I hope you'll stay on until the very end. In the event that you can't stay on until the end, we are recording today's event. And good news, you can also share it with colleagues, friends, kids, whoever it is that's in your life that you want to share the recording with after this event, because it's going to be valuable and you will want to. Also, I will often be asked if we're going to share the slides, and the answer is yes. We will share a PDF of these cool slides after the event concludes. We would love to also invite you to participate via social media today. We'll be checking the Twitter stream later. You can use Dan's name, Dan Negroni is his Twitter handle, and you can also use the hashtag Chasing Relevance. By the way, I'm happy to tell you this is the week that new book, Dan's book, Chasing Relevance, is launched. You can see the book behind Dan. So part of our getting together for this event today is to celebrate the launch of Dan's book. Congratulations, Dan.
Thank you.
So we have people calling in from everywhere. So many people answered so quickly. We have people in Florida, San Diego, all over California, Illinois, Colorado, Minneapolis, DC, South Carolina, Indianapolis, Philadelphia, Orange, California, Rhode Island. It looks to me like we might have nearly every state in the union represented, and some from Canada as well. So thank you so much to all of you who are investing your time in learning with Dan and me today. We are so glad you're here. We're going to get started with the content in just a moment, but before we do that, I want to introduce my friend Dan Negroni. As I mentioned before, he's the author of a new book, which I think is destined to become a bestseller with your help, and the book is called Chasing Relevance. Dan is a business and management talent development consultant and coach, and he's addressing the critical issues that so many of us face when we deal with millennials in the workforce. Dan leverages his authentic and no-nonsense approach, which you'll see very soon. In order to address those issues, he brings experience as a CEO, experience as an attorney, experience as a sales and marketing executive, and he does all of that to bridge the gap between managers and their millennial workforce, and he does that to create more employee engagement, productivity, and profits, which I'm sure we're all happy to hear about. So again, Dan, welcome, and I'm so excited for us to have this conversation.
I'm excited too. Good morning and afternoon, respectively, to everybody.
So Dan, we wanted to get started this morning with the poll and find out who is represented as it relates to the generations on this call. Do you want to introduce for us what those generations might be, and then we can launch that poll and get everyone's input?
Yeah, sure. So this slide depicts all the generations that are in the workplace today. And we hear about generational fodder everywhere. And you know, through Twitter, on the internet, all the time people are talking about the fact that there are 5 generations in the workplace today working, how confusing it is, and categorizing everyone to the different categories. And here they are basically for you to look at. We have the traditionalists, some people call them the silent generation, ages 70 to 87. Those people that really love to work or have to work. And then there are the boomers, the most that generation before Gen Y, 51 to 69 years old. And then there are Gen X, my gen, I make it by a month. And that's 36 to 50. And then, of course, why we're all gathered here today, the incredible millennial generation. I'm going to come right out of the closet, right out of the gate and say, I love millennials. They're awesome. They are 20 to 35 years old, and you're going to hear so much about them and why they're so important and critical in the workplace. And coming up really close behind them is Gen Z, if you haven't heard that term before. And Gen Z are kind of millennials on steroids. So really cool what's going on in the workplace. But I think we have a poll, don't we, Becky?
We do, and I'm going to launch that right now. And Dan, I did not notice this before. I was thinking that I had someone in the millennial or Gen Y generation living in my household, but I actually do not. I have one of those new Gen Zers. We actually don't have Gen Z on this poll, so if you are part of that new generation that's just coming up, millennials on steroids, we'd love to hear that from you in the question panel. We're going to give folks a little bit of time to answer. Thanks so much for your participation. I'm seeing that there's about 37% of the call that fit into the same generation as you and me, Dan, Generation X, but we're going to show those results in just a few moments. High participation. Thanks so much to all of you who are answering our poll. What would you expect, Dan, of what generation would be most represented on this call?
You know, most audiences we speak to when we're doing live talks, you know, most of them are boomers or Xers, and millennials only make up about 30% of the audience or less. It's because millennials don't have a problem with themselves. They get themselves quite clearly. So for the most part.
Well, it looks like our representation of the audience today pretty clearly matches what you usually speak to, Dan, with only 11% of the callers today being in the millennial or Gen Y camp. 39% of us Gen Xers. I'm just in the middle of that generation, proudly 45 years old today. And then we have 48% of our callers from the boomer generation and just a couple in that traditionalist camp. So thanks to all of you for participating and sharing that. Dan, I'm going to let you show your slides again and jump back in.
I'm back to my slide presentation. I hope you can all see them. Becky, if you can acknowledge that for me, that'd be great.
I'm not seeing your slides again. Oh, it's not my birthday, but thank you, whoever is wishing me a happy birthday. Dan, I'm just having a little bit of trouble here. I closed the poll, but I'm not seeing your slides. So let me just give a quick minute. And the question that we want to start with is a pretty important one about communication. And if you can just give me 1 second, Dan, I need to multitask here with the polls. Would you like me to go ahead and start that question, and then I'll keep working on the polls and making them go away?
Yeah, why don't you start the question, and then we can see if we can get my... Do I have to press start broadcast here, Becky, or you've done that already?
No, we have already started the broadcast, and according to what I'm looking at on my GoToWebinar panel, we might be having a small glitch because it shows that you should be able to show your screen. So if you can look for that show my screen button. The question we want to start with are, what are the 3 biggest challenges organizations have with millennials in the workplace?
Okay, well, I'm going to go and try and multitask and see. Yeah, it's not letting me figure out how to show my screen. Maybe you have to change presenter. Oh, it says off-air poll in progress, Becky. But I will answer that question while you try and figure that out. Without slides, the number one problem in the workplace is communication. There we go. So now I'm going to put the slides back on and see if you see all that. I want to go back to the generation slide for a second before I answer that question and tell you this. This is not your father's generation talk. You'll see at the bottom of the slide, if you see all these different attributes of the particular generations and what generation should talk to the other generation like what. For example, a boomer should talk to a Gen Y like this, or a Gen X should talk to a Gen Y like that. We blow that up. Communication. And everyone's different. And because everyone's different, it requires you to lean in and really understand them to connect the generations. And so if the biggest problem is communication, we really need to understand who we're talking about. And so You can see from this slide that millennials are the power now. Often when I go into do a speaking engagement, I get, Dan, millennials are, they're so entitled, they're so disloyal, they only care about purpose, they want balance, they need feedback, they're so needy, all the negatives. And they want all the power. They want to go from the basically mailroom to the boardroom within, 2 weeks, basically. And I say, I think you have it wrong. And look at this slide and you'll see millennials are the power. With 2.4 billion of them around the world, 60% of the world's population under the age of 30 and 83 million strong just in the US, the largest demographic we have here, and certainly the most studied, as you guys have heard and you've tuned in to see. They're 40% of the workforce today. And in the next 10 years, they'll be 75% of the workforce. And if that wasn't bad enough, or that wasn't telling enough to figure out that you better pay attention to this topic, look at the bottom part of the slide. They're controlling $660 billion worth of spend, growing to 1.5 trillion in the next 5 years. And even if they're not controlling the spend or out there in the workplace, in households, they're deciding where parents go on vacation, what cars they buy, what homes they buy. So they also decide what businesses make it or don't. If you can say taxi industry and then Uber. If you could say hotel industry and then look at Airbnb being the largest, the 5th largest hotelier in the world, they're deciding what businesses make it. So I think that one of the biggest challenges is accepting that millennials are here to stay, understanding who they are and understanding how great they can be and that they are the power. And I would say the third biggest thing is really the understanding of how they grew up. And they grew up differently than us. Becky, do you know why or what the biggest difference in this generation versus others? Because this problem's been around since Socrates and Plato. Why is this generation different? Why do you think?
Well, thinking about how my kids are growing up, they have access to technology in a much different way. When I went to college, I didn't even have email, right? So the connectedness to technology seems like the biggest difference.
So I totally think you're right. And when I go around and ask that, people get that question pretty quickly, and I just hold up my phone and I say, they grew up very different than we did. And if you can look at this slide, we'll all have a little laugh about it that aren't millennials, and the millennials will even identify it, the 11% of them or 12% of them that are on the call. Days filled with activities, trophies for everyone, super diverse in terms of being able to understand families of different sizes and shapes and all the things about, preferences that people have and the way they live. They're totally open to that stuff. But they grew up with information at their fingertips and socially connected. As a matter of fact, the technology we're using right here with the GoToMeeting is so different. They also grew up as the center of attention and asked to question everything. And then when they get to the workplace, we're like, why do they ask so many questions? It's pretty shocking to me that we actually created this generation to be like this, but yet we don't understand all these challenges that are going on in the workplace. But those are pretty much the three biggest challenges that we have. I think it's important to note here that creates generational conflict. And this slide pretty much sums up what's going on in the workplace. So if you look at the first quadrant, we hate them, right? Completely selfie-loving, taking pictures of themselves everywhere they go, every food they eat, every outfit they wear. And when they're done doing that, they're asking us to take pictures of them, right? Totally self-absorbed. So we hate them, but we also love them. They're our kids. They're fun. They're young. They're youthful. We, as a society, attract to youth and experience, and provocativeness, and we love them. They love us too, even though they don't act like it, both in the workplace and at home. They really love us. We're their guides. But here's the last quadrant is really the kick to the generational conflict. They're not quite sure that we really understand them, and I think they might be right. If you look at the political system and you look at what's going on with the environmental things, if you look at the economy that we've delivered to them, they're the first generation that's not going to do as well as we are. And we've been in the cure business, as Seth Godin said. We've cured every single problem for them. We haven't been in the storytelling business and let them fail. So when they get to the workplace, we want to give them all this advice and tell them what to do, and they're just not sure about us. But here's the rub. They totally need guides. They need us and we need them, right? And we need to guide them. It's really a fiduciary duty that for generations older people have done for younger people. So what the heck are we doing about it to connect and bridge that gap?
So Dan, that makes me think of something. I mean, I think when you talk about generational conflict, generations have always had trouble communicating. So why is this different? Like, how is this different than, I had trouble communicating with my parents or you with yours?
Yeah, I think, Becky, you answered the question for me before. Why do you think it's different? Mostly different.
The whole technology thing?
Yeah, I think it's the whole technology thing. And I think it's the speed in which we have to react to things these days. I think it's what we know and what we're aware of, what TV shows us, what radio shows us, what it looks like. It's all those things compounding, and time, the pressure of time management and the pressure of getting things done so quickly. So I just think it's heightened. I don't think it's much different. There's always been a challenge or disconnect between youth and experience. Every generation has complained about the others, but I do think it's very different because of technology, and we're more vocal. And they've pushed us to be more different about it because they want a seat at the table and they really want to make a difference. And they're pushing us harder, and they should. And it matters to us because if you look at these next slides, it really matters to the workplace because it's costing us a ton of money.
Well, let's talk about that, Dan. What are the biggest risks that organizations face in not understanding the millennial workforce?
Yeah, so I think the biggest risk is in this most disruptive world we live in today, in the most connected world, we're the most disconnected, and it's costing us a lot of money. We're going through people like it's water, and our businesses, if they're kind of old school businesses, let's say they're selling screws or they're building houses or they're kind of brick and mortar and not technology, we're really struggling with how to become more innovative and attracting great, smart, young talent to be disruptive and innovative and change the way we do business to be more Uber-like or Airbnb-like or approach our clients a little bit differently requires their talent, and they're leaving us more quickly. You can see millennials' average tenure at a company is 2 years versus baby boomers. Now, the interesting thing about that statistic is it's not all correct, because if you look at how baby boomers left jobs when they were younger, the numbers are much closer. And I think if you look at Gallup polls, you'll also see that if you can give millennials what they want, they'll be more loyal to you than boomers will actually be. But Becky, in this slide, it tells you the number one reason millennials are leaving their company. And it's really the number one reason anyone leaves their company. And what is that? You can read it for me. But I love to do interactive, so webinars are a little bit tougher. So I'll use you as my draw man.
Sure. I think it might have to do with their bosses, Dan. That's kind of scary. As the boss of some millennials. So
it totally puts the onus on us to be better and be stronger and get it right. And if we look at the workforce, 71% of millennials are disengaged or actively disengaged. That is a huge, and I quote Donald Trump when I say huge, number of discontent out there. Actively disengaged is about, I think it's about 11% of that number. That means they're looking for jobs. The rest of them are just miserable, so don't worry. If you're a boss, it's okay having miserable employees. That doesn't do anything to cost us money. It doesn't waste time at all. Obviously, I kid, and you can see that it costs us about $450 billion. Yesterday, I just did a talk, and we were over at a company, a big mortgage, top 10 mortgage company, and I was asking the CEO, what's your biggest threat? And the biggest threat to the future of their business is not only being able to understand their millennial employees, but to engage millennial customers to come buy mortgages from them that want to work differently. And here's the interesting thing. I'm going to make this point, and it's super critical to everyone. Millennial employees and millennial customers, they're the same person, and they want the same thing at work, and they want the same thing from the companies they buy from. And so it's really critical. This is not just about getting it right with your employees, but Richard Branson will tell you this. if you don't get it right with your employees, you're not going to get it right with your customers, because your employees are the ones taking care of your customers. So focus on your employees first. But the linkage between a company that does right by millennials in the consumer area is a company that is probably the most attractive company to work for millennials. Nike, Google, Facebook, Southwest, the ones that are doing really, really well for their employees are the cool ones that millennials want to be with. So very interesting statistic. And I'm thankful that all of you are on this call, and you can see that only 22% of businesses have a plan to deal with it. We have a solution to deal with it and solve the problem, but it's a big, big issue out there, and the disconnect is big.
Yeah, so Dan, I have a question that came into the panel that relates to what we're talking about right now. Jorge is wondering, do you believe that Gen Y is willing to get more things done than previous generations, or do they just want to do what they consider valuable?
The answer to that question, I'm going to give you a lawyer's answer, which is yes. I think both. I think they want to get things done and they want to do things that are valuable. I think it's manager's job and the employer's job to be able to demonstrate how those both coexist in the workplace and how we can really get them on the same page, and to be honest and open and authentic and clear about expectations and what they can expect from a certain company before coming on, and making sure that the fit of a particular millennial for a particular company is exactly the right fit.
That's a really important point, Dan. So I think that what I hear you saying is that we need to look at people as individuals, not making generalizations about millennials as a whole, but figuring out how individual millennials might fit into our companies. Is that part of the plan that you're recommending?
Yeah, I think the point is this, and yesterday, someone always the smart aleck says, Dan, I don't understand what's different about how you're saying we should treat millennials or what we should do with millennials versus managers. These are the same tactics. Yes, they're the same tactics. We're human beings. We need to learn how to care and manage and lead and influence people. And the same process can be taken with both sides of the equation, but both sides of the equation need to lean in to fix it. And that's what we do. It's helping people figure out how to do that. And I do think there's a nuance to really getting millennials and how you speak. But I think the most important nuance is to be bold and upfront and clear about what you want, because they've seen it all and they're ready for you to be clear. They don't like the cure business. They actually like the story business. And the number one thing they want in the workplace is the ability to learn and grow. And so if you can't be clear and teach them and tell them what's right or wrong, you can't win. But again, Becky, it goes back to the point you just mentioned, which is imperative, is that it's the same for people of all ages. Yes.
Got it. So we're looking at the slide here, Dan, and we're recognizing that there's a huge gap between the generations. So what do organizations and managers need to do to begin to bridge that gap?
Yeah, I think the reason there's this huge disconnect is what we do is complain. All we do is say there's a problem. And this is the most studied generation ever, and probably because of technology more than anything. Anyone can tweet or write an article or a blog, and so there's just a ton of stuff every day. But the disconnect is big. And the problem with the disconnect is this: it just ain't all true. Not at all, not even close to being true. So when we do these big presentations and we do them live, we ask them to scream out the myths about millennials or what they think about millennials. And they don't come out as myths. They come out, this is what we think. They jump ship if they're not engaged or always growing. They have different career goals. They want everything digital. They have a sense of entitlement. They only want work-life balance. They don't deal well with authority. They don't have organizational loyalty. And they want it all now. Right? And they want it fast, and they want it on their terms. And when we get to the truth of it, we know how much of it is true. Some of it's true. It's true and it's false, really. But the same thing is true about millennials, which are these myths. They don't recognize others. They're crotchety old, not tech savvy, only in it for the money, not willing to trade stability for really true passion or purpose, which is what millennials are about. They're afraid of non-traditional approaches, inflexible, right? And they live by this golden rule, which is I've got the gold, so I make all the rules and do what I say. We show this really great Mad Men clip about the guy yelling at one of the young people that she doesn't need recognition, that every day's a learning opportunity. And the truth is, this is true and false too. So we just need to stop all the nonsense and figure out how to work together and stop whining and complaining about the myths and start changing ourselves, each side changing themselves to work better. And that's really how we kind of chip away at the disconnect.
So we need to get rid of the myths on both sides.
Yeah, I mean, if communication is the number one challenge, we need to start communicating. It's no different when you have a myth about an assumption with a relationship with your spouse or someone that, personally. It's the same nonsense. If we lean in and we ask great questions and we learn and we coach and we do our duty to mentor and coach from both sides, and we've designed systems to be able to help businesses do that very clearly, it opens up and businesses increase their retention, they increase their profits, and guess what? They have a little bit more fun along the way.
So, Dan, we talked a little bit about myths, and there are obviously myths that we cling to, that we say about millennials in the workplace. But I'm wondering, is there any truth that we can find? Are there any common attributes that millennials look for in the workplace? What do millennials really want? And is there anything that we can learn from that?
Yeah, it's really interesting. So when we put this up, and we do it a little bit more interactively live, but millennials want the same thing managers want, and here's what they want. The number one thing they want, I told you, is the ability to learn and grow. And so Gallup actually has statistics that will show you that 89% of millennials that are learning and growing will stay working for their boss or are happy at their job. So I call that capability. They want to learn and grow. They're young. They need to learn and grow. They need to add to their toolbox to provide value to companies, and they understand that. The number two thing they want is really authenticity. They want to push us to be real deal, no BS. Sometimes they want to push us and not look at themselves, but it's the work we do really puts the mirror on both sides and shows them that if you want that, it's fine, but you got to give it too. They also really want feedback, but real and credible feedback. Most people will say millennials are whiny in the workforce and they just want feedback all the time. I think we stink as managers and we're not given enough feedback to any generation. And so when we get better at managing and feedback and communicating, guess what happens? People stay longer, people like their job more, they help their customers better, and it works. They do want purpose and meaning as well, and who can blame them? Who doesn't want it? They want more than us. And we should be working to do that, to provide value and be aligned with those things. And that's a corporate challenge, to figure out how individual goals, team goals, and company goals all align to do something or find the why or the meaning, the Simon Sinek why behind what we do. And they love to work in collaborative environments. So we're seeing new open workspaces. We're seeing think tanks, whiteboards everywhere. That's what they want. So to sit back and do things the way we did them 30 years ago, do it this way because I did it this way, I had no help coming up, go figure it out, it doesn't work, and it's not valid in today's economy or workforce. So shift. We all do want the same thing.
Well, and I think I like that upside down text because it makes you kind of stop and read it more slowly. These are all the things that I want in the workplace also. Of course, I want meaning and purpose and collaboration. So that's really helpful to remember, Dan.
Who doesn't, right? I mean, all good stuff. Well, it's so funny when we ask the questions instead of put up the slides, everyone will say, well, that's good. I'll take some of that. I'll take me some of that too. So it's really, and the rationale to do it, Becky, is, where youth and experience meet is magic in the workplace. It has been forever.
Well, so I think I know what's coming. Can you tell us the biggest tip you have for us in how to connect more effectively with millennials in the workplace?
Yeah, a little bit more about why it's such magic, and then I'll give you the tip. It's magic because youth, like I said, innovative, questioning, looking to do things differently. You know, they don't want to hear the answer, we've done it that way always, which is why we do it that way. And experience is amazing because it's time served, it's knowledge, it's having been through the war, figured it out in a different way. And when those two things combine, it's when you really, really figure out how to make a workplace hum, so to speak. And how do you make a workplace hum? Our modality is you train people from the inside out. And what I mean by that is this. Who's the only person you can control, Becky? And we've had conversations about this.
I am the only person I can control.
You can't control your kids. You can't control your spouse. I mean, I've been with my wife 33 years, and I still can't make an inkling of control play there. But here's the deal. You can only control yourself. And so the way we go about it is to have people figure out who they are, really who they are. And we have a particular process of doing that. And the first thing is understanding the power of relationships. In the book, you'll see that we talk about what is the most important life work skill. And if you could imagine right here at the top of the list, it's the ability to build relationships. If I ask you, Becky, what's the first relationship you need to focus on, what would be your answer?
I was thinking about my relationship with myself, Dan, like how I view myself and how I lead myself.
Exactly. And that's the one we want people, right? Because that's the only person you can control. And controlling yourself, putting your oxygen mask on, fixing yourself first allows you to provide value to the world in the workplace. Millennials haven't had a lot of this teaching or this process in school. Even in college, my son went to Boston College, $250,000 later, he didn't go through this process. But you can bet your butt, if you've known me just for a little while, he went through it driving to La Crosse every day of high school. And that was trying to figure out who he was and who he wanted to be in the world and how he could articulate his value to others. So I was telling this story about my son, which is that everyone goes to a fancy college, a fancy law school, or they get an MBA and they study, and we're not teaching these skills in those schools. And then when they get to the workplace, we're shocked that they don't have these skills. Surprise, surprise, right? We haven't taught them. We've been in the business of curing all their problems. We haven't taught them how to focus on themselves and build relationships. And so here's what we need to do. The process is simple. Understand yourself, understand your strengths. And by the way, millennials and managers alike love this because it's rare that we get the time to really understand it ourselves. But more importantly, in the third box, this recognizing our skills, passions, and values, it's done in a way that makes it about others. What are your skills, passions, and values? And we call it with them. What's in it for others? How do your skills, passions, and values create value for other people? And how do you define that? And then, what's your brand? Who do you want to be? How are you aspirationally living to what your brand is? And how do you develop a story to connect? Once you've done all that process in the workplace on both sides, it's really easy to figure out how to connect and build great businesses. And that is what we do through workshops and peer-to-peer groups, consulting and training. And it's just awesome. I mean, really, the change in people, it's goosebump worthy when you go through these, even in companies, to see coworkers do this process.
Do you have any stories that you can share about that, Dan?
I do have stories. I mean, I have a ton of stories to share about it. Generally, I'm thinking of the last company we just trained, and, it was the workplace, but there were tears, and not everyone has to cry for sure, but there were tears, and there were so many connections of things people did not know about other people that helped them work together. And this was a sales team. And we really metriced how they increased their sales. Or another story where we did this for an organization to really understand what they represented and how to talk to their consumers. We went back and we changed the way they connected online in their marketing. Using these types of stories, using this type of skills and analysis, and they've seen traffic go up, and click-through rates go up just by doing those types of things. Or the real estate agent who came not selling one deal, and a year later was selling 9 deals, right? 27 years old, because he understood these things about himself. So time and time again, we have stories of how people can connect with others.
So that goes back to what we talked about when I introduced you of employee engagement and profits increasing when people understand how to work together more effectively. Dan, can you talk to us a little bit before we go to questions about bridging the gap?
Yeah, so bridging the gap, so there are two things we do. One is this inside out strength and story, and the other thing is bridging the gap. What you can see in the first part of it is there's a 6-step process, and it takes you through in the book of how to really connect disparate groups or to connect with your employees that are millennials, specifically with great stories on how we've done it in companies. The first 3, busting myths, real deal, and I own it, are about individual change. And then the second 3, delivering value, goals in mind, and empowering success, are much about what the organization can do, although they're both individual and corporate things in those 3 as well. And we take them through this process, and depending upon the company, we use different aspects of the letters. We start every engagement with what we call as a bridge decks assessment, and we assess the gap or the disconnect. So we'll ask questions of managers or millennials or company and consumers in a very quick 8-question proprietary survey of each, and we figure out what the disconnect is, and then we use the tools within the particular letters to make sure that we can connect that organization based on what that particular organization needs, because each one has a different culture and is a little bit different.
Okay, well, this question that came in it speaks to this really succinctly. So Jay is wondering, besides the age gaps, do you see gaps culturally? So you are talking about company culture, but what about international culture? Can you tell us a little bit about how companies that have international workforces might deal with this somewhat differently?
Yeah, so I think you need to be, when you do the bridge decks assessment, if you know you're going to have a cultural issue in advance because of the population, you ask questions a little bit differently. And yes, we do see this manifested different culturally. There are lots of different habits for U.S. workers versus, right, let's say we're working for Qualcomm, engineers or coders from Asia or, right, from China or India. And so we do see different things, and there are different things. We do believe that age is the new diversity, and we also believe that age and perspective and technology is the common link between these millennials, but you have to be careful, again, just like each millennial or boomer or Xer is not the same, nor is each person. And so the model of what we do allows you to start from the inside out. And so while you're going through the process in any business, you can bring those things to the forefront to help you understand who your audience is. But yeah, it's a great question, and we have a ton of data on what's going on in Asia, what's going on in South America, how millennials work. It's very different.
Got it. Thanks, Dan. So we do have lots of questions that have come in, and I'm going to switch to sharing some of those so that we can address some of your questions. I want you to feel free to continue to add your questions to the question panel. So Dan, I want you to switch gears for a moment and talk to the millennials who might be on this call or listening to the recording later. What would you give to the millennials as the most important advice about how to work with people who are older than they are?
Yeah, I think it's so, first of all is, really understand, again, just like I'm telling them to understand you, you need to understand them. And the best way to do understanding is to ask questions, the power of the question. So I get this question every time, and I usually get it from millennials. Dan, what's the top tip you have for me to work with a manager? And here's what I tell you. Lean in, articulate your value, and ask friggin' amazing questions. Ask great questions. And focus on what you can do to ask great questions, to reshape the conversation, to bust the myths, and deliver value to others. So the questions are so important, but it's the type of question. Is it a question that's about you, young millennial, or is it a question that's about how you're going to provide value to the person in front of you? And if it's about you, move on. If it's about how you're going to add value to the person sitting next to you, how you're going to get the girl, get the guy, get the sale in your personal life or your professional life, get the client, figure out how to work with the manager, Ask amazingly astute and articulate questions that demonstrate that you care.
So is there any like magical list of questions, Dan? Like, could you give us an example of an amazing question that a millennial could ask?
Well, I'll give you an example of a great millennial question in an interview situation, and you could use it every time. And well, I teach my kids and I teach anyone that does any type of meeting with anyone is, how can I help you? Right? I mean, they're great gating questions like, what can I do to deliver value? Because I'm here to help, right? I have that thing. In an interview, I love the question that a millennial could ask, or they could ask it when they're getting a project too. What does success look like, right? What are your expectations? What does it look like if I'm successful in this project? What's the end result look like for you? Same thing in this job. What will it take to be successful in this job? How will I help you do your job better if you're going to be my boss? How am I going to make a difference for you, right? So again, each situation is different, but the rubric or foundation of the questions is, how are you going to provide value to the other person? Look, if you're so clear that you want capability to learn and grow, you want authenticity, you want purpose as a millennial, you want feedback, then come to the table with questions that are completely focused on that in a way that helps the other person more. And it's that simple. And so I could give you 100 questions for each situation, but they're situational.
Great, thanks, Dan. So I'm seeing a couple of questions here about entitlement, and I haven't heard you say anything about entitlement as it relates to one of the common complaints about millennials in the workplace. So Nora is asking, how do we work around entitlement attitudes? So do they exist, or are they real, Dan?
Of course they're real, but they're real with people of all ages. And millennials just don't understand, and youth is youth. And so we have to understand. So look, instead of, I said something about entitlement, I said at the beginning, it's the biggest myth. I said, when people talk to me, they say, oh, millennials, they want all the power, they're so entitled. It's the number one thing we say. It's a condition of youth. And our job is to help, here comes a train, so I apologize in advance. But our job is to help millennials figure out what entitlement looks like and why it sounds like entitlement. And so when I hear entitlement from a millennial, I dig right in and say, wow, who's that question about? Or what's that about? Is that about you, or is that about the company, right? Because we're all here for the company, right? And if it is about you, how can I help you? So I do think entitlement is an issue. I think it's, how good a manager are you to call people on entitlement in a caring way that says, I got your back. I'm not going to let you fall, but please help me make it about the organization or understand your point. And going in with the judgment that says, they're so entitled, all they care about themselves, well, that doesn't help anyone, ever.
Got it. That's great, Dan. Thank you. Tell me a little bit more about vulnerability and why it's so important as it relates to bridging generational gaps.
Yeah, I think vulnerability is probably the most important quality of a leader, right? We're trying to shape trust. We hear all these buzzwords about culture and creating a culture, but it's really about human beings being able to talk and communicate to each other and being able to trust and care about each other. It's a human condition. It's why we're humans. It's why relationship building is the number one important skill, because we don't live on an island alone, right? And so it's just super critical that we figure that out. And how to build relationships is, the thing that we should be teaching.
Right. So another question, again, from Eileen, she's wondering, she said that in their workplace, they experience an issue with timeliness and attendance, that the millennials in their organization are great when they're at work, but don't really understand that they need to show up to work. So do you have any advice on that topic?
Yeah, I have employees of all ages that have that challenge. And I think it is a condition of the way they grew up and the way the world is now. I think you have to set expectations clearly on timeliness with millennials. I think you need to be more flexible and understand that if they want to wake up at 3 in the morning and work for 2 hours, how do you figure out a way that that you can work that into the business if it's something that that is a condition of the job. Clearly, if they're a receptionist and your office opens at 9 and they're not there at 8:45 to prepare what they need to prepare and be there by 9 and be there for those times, that's a challenge. And that's about really setting expectations up front, which is, look, this job requires timeliness. How good are you at timeliness? And I don't mean like around the, you'll get 2 late passes and that's it, and then we'll terminate you. But if you want to provide value and if you want to work with this company, you have to do that. It is the biggest challenge millennials have. I think creating a culture that understands that they need to be there by that time and letting them go quickly if they can't get that that down pat. Or, of course, being flexible if you can in the way they work.
Got it. So back on the manager side, Cynthia is wondering how you motivate managers to coach the younger generations and to bridge that gap and build relationships. How do you do that?
God, I love that. And Becky, we have a friend that has, Why Motivating People Doesn't Work and What Does, a book on that, Susan Fowler. And I'll tell you this, how do we motivate people? We speak very boldly and clearly to them about what they want to be and who they want to be in the workplace and what they want their legacy to be. And I'll tell you this, some managers just don't give a hoot. And if they don't give a hoot, you have to look really clearly about whether that's a person you want on your team. The question to them is, who do they want to be to the younger generation? It's the same question we ask lots of parents, which is, you can't give up as a parent if you want to be a good parent, and you can't give up as a manager if you want to be a good manager. How willing are you to take those bold steps and not to whine and complain that they should just know it, or you told them how to do it, or you're not going to do it differently? And it's a mindset and a mind shift that we need to get managers. And so in Susan's book, she talks about figuring out what really motivates the people and what pulls at their heartstrings to create the mind shift. And that's what you have to work on is, what is each individual person's mindset shift? It's hard work. There's no quick cure to teaching people how to be great with people, unfortunately. It takes hard work and dedication.
Accountable without placing blame on others.
I think that's completely about coaching. I mean, millennials, aside from placing blame on others, it's about placing blame, on themselves. It's a very much direct questions about who's that about, who can you control, what are we talking about, how can you do your best no matter what your boss is doing or no matter what your teammate is, what standard are you going to hold yourself to? It's all those types of things.
So Dan, do you have any advice for millennials who have to manage boomers or others in a generation that's older than they are?
Yeah. Treat them the way that they would like to be treated, okay? In as candid and open a way as you can, and understand the sensitivity that they are being managed by someone who's younger, and that could be some sense of a raw type of thing, and it's just really about understanding who your audience is. And just like you want them to understand the way you work, understand the way they work. And it's no different with managing anyone.
Got it. So we have an interesting comment here from Nora, who says that she finds that younger generations bring an amazing outlook and technical comprehension of how the world works. And she's creating a company structure to share and use their skills. So that's pretty exciting. She wants to get in touch with you. And hopefully you'll be able to add some value and learn from her as well. So Cynthia says, Dan, that you've given a lot of great points on the myths about millennials and managers and the fact that workplace and connections are a two-way process. And hold on one second, I lost that. And also she's commenting that there's some great points that you shared that she hasn't heard before. So Dan, kudos to you with that. So here's a question for you. How do you, as someone in the Gen X, how would you open up this conversation to your supervisor? So I'm imagining, Dan, that there are a lot of people on the line who may not be the decision makers or may not feel like they have a lot of control. So what can people do to open up these conversations in the workplace to be able to bridge those gaps?
the sales guy in me is dying to answer the question by buy the book and give it to him. We actually have, Core Power Yoga and Equinox and a lot of the places where millennials hang out around the country, stocking the book with a program that says buy this for your manager and give it to him. But, look, I think it's about creating an opportunity to really understand that manager. I'm going to tell you a quick story. We have a couple peer-to-peer networking groups with about 50 millennials in them, where they network here, and they're super cool groups, and they help each other. And they also have coaching office hours. And so a millennial came in and said, look, I work at this big company. The person that I work for has been super successful because they've been there since the beginning. They had a lot of stock, and they have a really, really bad attitude. And I love the person, and I can't figure out how to get through to them. And I love what they teach me, but they're so sour most of the time, and it's really hard to work with them. And so I said, well, have you ever told her how important she was to you and how much you learned from her and how happy it makes you and all the good stuff? And she said, no, why would I ever tell her? So anyway, long and short of it is she comes back about 2 months later and says, I did what you said. I said, what do you mean you did what I said? What are you talking about? She tells me the story of how she took her manager to lunch, and she told her that story in an effort to try and open her up to connect more so they could work better together. And she said, I told her how much I liked her and respected her. I said, yeah, and what happened? And you know what she said? She said she started to cry. Wow. I never knew that. I never knew I had such an impact on you. I never knew I was so responsible to do that. What can I do to help? So I'm not saying that, right, everyone's going to have a manager that will cry to them, but I'm saying if you open up the dialogue in a right way with the right questions, like we talked about before, I think you can really shift someone's behavior. And again, focus on what you're doing to create the difference for that manager. And if they don't open up and they don't cry and they don't love you and it's not a love fest, it's okay. Do it. Continue to do it until you cannot do it anymore and you've gotten to be your best self. You've coached yourself. You've learned how to fish to deal with any manager, and then bounce and leave because you've done exactly what you've tried, your best at.
I love that, Dan. That relational connectedness and making an effort to be able to share and open up and be transparent and invite the relationship that you want in the workplace. That's a really, really powerful suggestion. And I hope that the folks who are listening to this webinar will try it out and open up some conversations amongst the generations in the workplace. So Dan, we were going to try a webinar poll at the end of this event. I'm thinking that perhaps we oughtn't risk that, but I know that we should not risk that, but I would love for you to introduce what that poll question was as a way of kind of wrapping up our hour together.
Yeah, I think, so here's how we kind of wrap up the hour the 20-minute talk, which is, this is what I want to leave everyone with. Look, you've all cared enough to lean in to learn about other people in the workplace, to reshape your workplaces to be better. So we got a great group here. And I just ask you this question. What do you want your legacy to be with your workforce? What do you want to be known for? What do you want to be known as? Just like we're a parent and we get an opportunity to really make a difference in people's lives, how important that is that to you, and what are you going to do about it? There's this it's too bad we couldn't play video because we have all these great videos. And the most recent one that I love is the Michael Phelps, My New Man Crush, has an Under Armour commercial where it just is all this great music, and it basically says, what you do in the dark is who you are in the light. And I really, really want to push all of you to understand, what are you doing? Like, are you working as hard as you can work to make a difference in a young person's life? And what does it mean to you to do that? And if you're a younger person, a millennial, what are you doing to shape your organization in the same way? That's what we get to do and be. It's when we focus about all the nonsense and the finger pointing and we don't make an effort to do those things is when we lose. When we win is when we really, really figure out what difference we want to be in the world. And I'm an optimist, and I believe that most people want to make a difference. So the question to each of you is, what the heck are you doing to make sure that you do that every day? and to remind yourself of that, because that's what it's about. Because where youth and experience meet is complete magic. And if you do this in your professional life, I promise you, I guarantee 100% that you will understand your children better, that you will have better relationship with your millennial children or your millennial friends, and your life will be richer. And that's the impact we're trying to make on the workplace and the world.
Dan, I just love
So
that.
go
So
do it.
I want to let our listeners know ways that they can get in touch with you and with your company, Launchbox. As you'll see here, Launchbox provides a wide range of services to help you bridge that gap with millennials in the workplace, including leadership training, coaching, and speaking. Of course, you can buy the book at chasingrelevance.com or wherever books are sold. And if you've already read the book, I would invite you this week to share a review of the book on Amazon. That will help us get this message out to more people. So thanks to all of you. I said at the beginning of the hour that we will have some giveaways. I have 5 books and 1 coaching session to give away. If you can email me, Becky@weavinginfluence.com, and share your feedback about this event, we will choose randomly and give away those books and also that coaching session. So chasingrelevance.com.
Hey, Becky,
Yes, sir.
let's get some real feedback. Let's give away 5 coaching sessions. I really would love feedback on how we could make a difference and be better, and how we could, kind of drink our own Kool-Aid. So we'll give away 5 free coaching sessions, and with the books. So.
Wow, amazing. Okay, so a very generous offer here from Dan. My email address is becky@weavinginfluence.com, or you would have received emails about this event from me. If you want to reply to any of those emails, I'll get your feedback, and we will randomly choose and share those coaching sessions and books with those of you who have invested an hour with us. We will do some editing on this recording. We had a few technical difficulties, so thanks for hanging in there with us, and we'll get the recording and the slides out to you. So have a great day, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you.